Welcome, everyone, to Beyond Surviving, the safe space for survivors of childhood sexual abuse to receive support, resources, and share their stories. Beyond Surviving is about freedom, healing, connection, and even laughter and fun. Most importantly, it's about letting go of the pain of abuse and finally moving on. I'm Rachel Grant, and for those of you who don't yet know me, I've been a sexual abuse recovery coach since 2007 and am the author of Beyond Surviving, the final stage of recovery from sexual abuse. You can learn more about me and the Beyond Surviving program at rachelgrantcoaching.com. Now, my guest today is Chris Times. With a Bachelor of Science degree in Christian leadership and biblical studies and a Master of Arts in counseling, Chris specializes in anxiety, trauma, sexual, physical, and emotional abuse, addictive process such as gambling and shopping and substance abuse, and workplace violence. Since 1990, he's been assisting his clients in creating opportunities where each of them discover ways to become who they are meant to be through finding ways to become unstuck, leaving painful patterns of being and discovering new ways of relating to the self and to the world in which they live, breathe, and have their being, oftentimes using movement and self-mobility. Now, one of the reasons why I'm particularly thrilled to have Chris here today is because he and I have been in contact for many years now, but this is our first time actually getting to connect live and in person. We've always been on, the Facebook. And Chris also serves as a comment moderator for our closed Healing from Sexual Abuse Facebook group. So he volunteers his time and gives of himself so graciously to that community. And I'm so very thankful for that. And I'm very excited to have Chris here to share his story and his wisdom when it comes to healing from trauma. So Chris, welcome. Thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you for having me, Rachel. This is awesome.
Yeah, I'm so glad that we have this time to connect. And I'd like to start us off with just giving you some space to share
hmm
a bit of your story with our listeners.
hmm Well, I basically had some trauma when I was 3.5 years old. I was a sickly kid. My mom always told me stuff like, "Oh, you're just sickly, and that's just how you were." But some things, even when I was little, didn't make sense as to how, I was relating to myself. And even as a very young child, I knew that something wasn't quite right, something was off. But of course, I was told that, I was crazy and I was self conscious and, oh, you're just a sensitive person, or you're too sensitive, or why are you crying all the time? I was discounted in every possible way, relating to my personal experiences, the way I felt, the way I perceived the world around me, from things that I was seeing, hearing, and understanding as being true. Those things were totally discounted. And so I literally kind of like forgot who I was. But I started having flashbacks about around 41 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And those things were so real. It was incredible. I always heard about them, but I never really experienced them. And this was right before I decided to go to grad school for my master's degree. And what happened was really incredible. I started seeing actual events take place that had to been deep in my subconscious while I was like watching TV on a Saturday. It was a sunny day. I had
Wow.
no
Yeah.
reason to be thinking about anything traumatic. I was watching, I think, a football game or something at the
Mm.
time, sitting on my sofa, and the next thing I knew, a vision flashed in front of my face that was so real that it caused me to have an anxiety attack. And that was incredible. And that opened up a lot of other doors that continued to open. So I found out through those experiences that my mom may have molested me when I was 3 years old. I know one of her girlfriends did because she confronted me at a funeral around that time,
Mm.
told me things that validated a lot of things that I had been feeling and perceiving my entire life. And so it just really kind of things started to connect in a way that was, for me, I guess, reconnecting with my body in a way that I hadn't before. So in short, that's kind of what I noticed. And I just remember some weird things too, like the number three stood out for me, but I didn't connect at the time that three is when I was molested,
Yeah.
by these women, and there are other things. One particular flashback I had was literally me standing in our old house when I was very young, staring at the sofa with, I think, my mom or somebody on the sofa telling me to come here. And then there was no one else in the home. But that makes sense because I was often kept back. I have five brothers, so I was kept back on a lot of occasions, and I was told, "You're sick. You have to stay home."
Right.
But I did not feel sick,
I
and
see.
so that created some problems. So that's kind of my history, a little bit of
Yeah.
some things that had happened with me.
Thank you, Chris, for sharing a little bit of your story with us. And, what really stands out to me is this moment in your 40s where the flashbacks begin. And I know so many survivors and certainly so many of my clients have that experience where, like, out of the blue, it's like just a normal day, you're going along, and
Hmm.
then boom, there are those thoughts, there are those feelings, there are those memories. And making sense of that and sorting all of that out. What do you recall as being kind of most helpful for you when that started? When you started to have these memories and all these feelings were arising, was there anything that you recall at that time that was particularly soothing or helpful in that moment?
For me, I felt like I was falling down a well of sorts, and I was just grasping for any type of support.
Yeah.
But there's literally one thing that really kind of caused me to be stable, and that was my faith in God and the fact that I knew that something greater had to come out of all of this trauma, all of this mess that
Yeah.
I was told wasn't. My mom literally told me when I was, like 17, 18, "Oh, you're crazy," and I'm thinking, wow, this is even more traumatic because I'm trying to quote unquote deny my own experiences.
Right.
And so it's just one of those things that my faith has been constant for me my entire life. My parents weren't really constant because I wasn't supported, and it seemed like a lot of other people in my family circle
Uh-huh.
knew what was going on, Rachel, and they never said anything about
Nothing.
it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And these were educators. These are people who knew about human growth and development and things like that, and they turned a blind eye to all of the things that were going on, and some of them knew more than others, and it's like really
Hmm.
traumatic thinking about how many times I was neglected in that regard also.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's such a painful experience to, first of all, be trying to, I think, what I hear from a lot of my clients who go through this is finding the truth in their experience. I mean, even
Mm.
those of us who have very clear, explicit memories,
Hmm.
for the entire time, like from the get-go, can find ourselves trying to deny the experience, and maybe that didn't really happen. And then when you have this moment of recall of memory and you have lots of people around you
Hmm.
denying the experience, telling you all sorts of things about yourself, it kind of creates this additional hurdle for you to overcome in the healing process. But
Yes.
heal you did. And not only that, have gone on to use everything that you've experienced to be able to support others. So I want to get a little bit into some of the, for you, like some of the pillars that have been so critical. And you've already started by talking about how God was really an important piece for you. So maybe we'll start there. To your mind, what role does spirituality play in healing?
For me, growing up, I just kind of had an idea of going to church and doing Bible study and the normal types of things that you would do if you go to church or synagogue or a mosque. And so that was my connection. But as I grew and as I became aware of who I am and in relation to the planet, in relation to the universe, in relation to God, I started to see something that was common. And the common element there was connection
Mm,
between something greater than me, something more divine, something supreme, someone who actually cared about me, loved me unconditionally, opposed to conditional love or no love at all. Someone who had a really positive energy source. For me, that's God, and how I could actually draw without any type of compromise or issue of apology, pulling down unconditional love uh,
mm.
within that framework really helped me grow and blossom.
Yeah. I love that, tapping into something that gives us a stronger sense of who we are. And
Hmm.
for many, many people, that is spirituality, that is God. It's like this something outside of ourselves that we can tap into that says, hey, let me tell you the truth about who
Yeah,
you are. This abuse has taught you all sorts of lies about who you are. And there is another truth. And some people, excuse me, access that, through God. Excuse me, guys. And some people, find other resources. But I love that you were able to use that as an anchor to help you find that sense of self that then propelled you forward, in your life.
yeah,
And my
yeah.
guess is, Chris, because you do have such an anchor and such a strong connection, in Christian leadership and biblical studies and these sorts of things, that people come to you maybe sometimes with confusion about that, I'm wondering. And for many people, their relationship to God or to spirituality has been harmed by abuse,
Hmm.
right? There's the why would God let this happen question, and these sorts of things. Did you ever struggle with that question? And if so, how did you resolve it?
I did struggle. I got mad at God. Oh my gosh, I threw temper tantrums. I yelled at God, and I remember one particular day. Oh my gosh, it was at night around 9 o'clock or so. I was in the middle of my funk, and I was yelling at God, and just kind of in my apartment. And I took a drive, and I went down and went to Big Lots for whatever reason, and
Right on.
and I was in the and I was the whole time. You know how you do that mind think talk type self talk thing, and I was doing
Yeah.
all of that, and I was going down the aisles, pissed off at God, just to give him a piece of my mind type of thing. Why you let this happen to me, and you messed up my life, and all that. And so when I said I want answers, and I was like being pretty demanding in my head. And
Yeah.
as soon as I walked up to the checkout, this lady, it's a black lady with two grandkids sitting in front of me, standing in front of me checking out. And the weirdest thing happened is she checked out and she left, and then she came back. And then she met me as I checked out, and then she says, God told me to tell you something. And she started answering the same questions that I was posing to God. And that right there stopped me dead in my tracks.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, okay, there's no coincidence with this.
Right. Yeah.
I was asking questions, and this lady stopped what she was doing, and she actually answered these questions. There's no way she could have known what was going on in my head. And
Wow.
so that caused me to go on a deliberate journey
Mm.
to seek more about, because my initial thought growing up was a regular, Sunday school Bible study type of thing about God. But
Yeah.
here, this particular moment in time caused me to look deeper. There's way more about God than what I was taught or had been exposed to. There's a
Mm.
personal being there and a personal element there that he reached out literally to me and answered the very questions I was asking
Mm-hmm.
in haste and in anger. And
Right.
so I started to search
Okay.
then outside of the norm to see what is this. And so I really believe that that opened another door for me
Yeah.
to just kind of step beyond quote unquote religion and move towards a spirituality piece. So
Mm,
that's what I share with my clients when I see them in group. And this is my famous line from Virginia to Texas, my famous line. And this is my rule. I said, I can't talk, and I'll tell them, I can't talk, I don't talk about God or spirituality or whomever you, but I said, but if you bring it up, then now I have license to talk about it. And so
you crack the door open. I'm coming in. You got her coming in. Yeah.
and invariably they all agree. Yeah, okay, and that's how
Right.
it goes. And
Right.
so that's kind of a pillar for me that I've noticed that a lot of people can relate to in
Yeah.
one way or another.
So, Chris, what do you say when somebody's hurting and they're in that place of pain and they're hurting in relationship to God or spirituality or universe or anything you want to call it, and they're like,
Mhm.
why did he, she, it, let this happen to me?
Mhm.
How do you counsel someone in that moment? What do you usually say?
I kind of go back to how I was feeling when I was asking those same questions, and I pretty much hold the space for them. I
Mm,
don't lecture. I never lecture. I don't push off what I believe or my experiences about God on
mm,
anybody ever. I hold the space and I allow that individual to process if they want to and to connect in any way that's good for them or relevant for them. And if that turns out to be a conversation about God, fine. If it doesn't, fine. If it turns out that they're just connecting with the universal energy or whatever they want to call, fine. I can talk about it. I can
mm,
draw from my education in biblical studies and just pull from there and talk about that and just kind of express some type of kinship. I can meet people where they are,
yeah,
and that's kind of my whole thing about it. And if
love
you
that.
if you want to, some of my best friends, it's like, hey, I've had friends who would say, Chris, I don't, believe in God. This is in Virginia. I don't believe in God, and these are, people who hadn't really kind of reconciled their
Mm,
trauma past. But then they say, well, but could you pray for me? And I would
right.
say, sure. I mean, it's about
Yeah.
holding the space for me. For me, it's about holding the space and allowing somebody or somebodies to pour out whatever it is they need to pour
I
out.
love that, Chris. Yeah, sometimes when we're in the space of coach or supporter, we want to try to fill in those blanks. And there are some big questions that we don't always have the answers to. And
Mm-hmm.
so just giving love and support to someone who's in that struggle and letting them find their way through that fog and come to
Mm-hmm.
that place of resolution in a way that makes sense for them. And,
Mm-hmm.
that really, I think, brings us to the second piece that we wanted to touch on today, which, we've been talking a little bit about how having a connection to a universal power, a power that's greater than us, can soothe us and comfort us in many times of need. But we also need connection, here on the, on the material
Yeah.
realm, if you will. And I know that you have a lot to say about how connection can help a person adjust to trauma. So can you say a little
Mm-hmm.
bit more about that and why that's so important for us to be connected?
Oh yes. When I do groups, and I do groups in a hospital setting and also in a clinic setting, that tends to come up. When I was doing my graduate work, that particular came up. There was one thing that came up. It was connection or the lack thereof.
Mm,
There's a disruption that happens with every human being when they experience trauma, either sexual, physical, or or the like. Those traumas cause a disruption to take place. I believe with your energy flow within you,
mhm,
and what happens generally is that you lose something. So we're talking about loss, and when you lose this energetic connection with the sky and basically with other people, then now you're isolated. And a lot of symptoms, like say with depression, kind of mimic that, you know,
Yeah.
where people push away and they isolate. Schizophrenia the same way. Other disorders the same way. And it's like this lack of connection is really evidence of a disruptive energy pattern within an individual where they are not now able to connect with other human beings around them. I've seen people, I've got a couple of clients right now that prefer to be around animals because they don't trust people because of that
Right. Yeah.
trauma, right?
Mm.
Yeah. And so it's this reconnecting piece that
Yeah.
is so powerful. It's this reconnect, and actually, it's a deep feeling about that
Mm.
I've noticed within myself and with my clients when it comes to shall I reach out?
Yeah.
Shall I reach out and try this again, basically? Because the trauma disconnected them in the first place.
Right.
Whether you want to identify with the trauma or not, the fact that it happened created this chasm, if you will, to where now you have you've been forced to or made a decision to because you need to save yourself. And I call it, Rachel, survival.
Yeah,
So
for
you go
sure.
into survival mode, and so you disconnect. You disconnect.
Hmm.
You pull in, and so that creates even more trauma because I believe that we're all created to connect with each other.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and as people who are loving and encouraging and nurturing beings, that's what we do. Hey,
Hmm.
I even talk about animals and plants. Did you know that plants connect with each other? Trees,
Yeah.
when they communicate through their root systems, they actually can talk to each other. Sounds strange, but they do.
It's so
And
true. Yeah.
yes,
My
it's
honey
through
is a
this.
gardener. He's always talking about this stuff.
Oh my God. And
Yeah.
the idea about talking to your plants, I got into this
Oh,
conversation with somebody
yes.
else the other
Oh,
day, I think at
yes.
the hospital. Yeah. So all of that stuff works. And I'm like, okay, I've noticed that in nature. And I'm like, this is a problem for us,
Mhm. Yeah.
especially those of us who have been wounded and go through life in that wounded state. I also, and
Right.
I didn't mention it to you before, but I also talk about how this lack of break in connection creates an emotional response also
Right.
um, in the psyche. So when you have this disconnection or this disconnectedness, a lot of times your emotional state increases exponentially. And when that happens, there's yet now another disruption and so in the body. And
Yeah.
so my whole work is to pull these disruptions back and allow people to venture out and express themselves in safe ways and try to reconnect with people, safe
Mm.
people though,
Mhm.
people who are
Yeah, that's
safe,
key.
people who are, and I don't, I talk about the gut and how you are able to gauge now, Rachel, how you are to reach out to other people who are safe. And,
Right.
the gut's 99.9% right when it comes to judging
Mm.
who's okay and who's
Mm.
not,
Mhm.
you know. Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's
Yeah.
what I do.
So I feel like we need a whole nother podcast for this topic because there's so much richness in everything that you're sharing and saying there, Chris.
Mm,
First of all of those things that cause us to disconnect, just the trauma in and of itself creates a
mhm,
rift, an
mhm,
interior disconnection, a disconnection with self. And
mhm,
then when we go out into the world, we find it hard to connect with others around us,
mhm,
having a hard time trusting. All of that shame stuff gets in the way of us being able
mhm,
to connect. And then this becomes a rinse and repeat pattern, right? So we connect with people who might not be that great with us. Our ability to listen to and understand our instincts is a little bit broken, and we need
Mm-hmm.
to repair that. But until then, yeah, we find ourselves in harmful relationships or getting
Mm-hmm.
hurt, and then that further repeats this pattern of why connect, why reach out, why be with anyone. And
Mm-hmm.
connection, I am so in agreement with you, is at the root of our healing in so many ways. And so finding those little ways that we can step out and take it on and try it out and build some connections, um, I think is so foundational towards being able to heal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Totally. Totally. 100%. And the idea that, some people might try to reach out, but then they're the wrong people, I call it,
Mm,
because now you've introduced something that's historical when it comes to how did I relate to other people who now have hurt me in
right.
various types of traumatic ways. So you kind of almost, if you're not careful, and following your gut and doing it in a way that's purposeful and meaningful, and kind of cautious because you just don't want to reach out to just anybody.
Hmm.
Follow your gut and say, okay, is this person safe for me to reach out? What does my gut tell me?
Yeah. Yeah,
And that to me means a lot. It takes practice.
for sure.
Practice, practice, practice. But once you get a good idea,
Mm,
a good feeling, and this has a lot to do with how I connect uh, from the neck down, right?
mm,
And how
right.
do I
Right.
engage myself? How do I engage myself? Because that's lost with initial traumas and subsequent traumas also. How
Right.
do I engage myself? How do I trust myself? How do I start, use the big L word, love myself enough to afford this opportunity to reach out to trust not the same old people, but the right people?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that you're making that distinction, because one of the things that I see that I've experienced myself and I see in so many of my clients is that when we're in our head, our thought patterns have been so skewed as a result of trauma, and
Mm-hmm.
our capacity to see everything through a negative lens, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to
Yes.
see danger around every corner. I sometimes describe it like we see butterflies and we run away, like in
Right.
terror,
Right.
and like we welcome the tigers on over.
Yeah.
It's like our risk meters are just, back asswards. And so
Yes.
when we can start to notice when it's the negative thought and distinguish that from this is my gut telling me this is a bad situation, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We have to be able to parse that out. And exactly as you
Mm-hmm.
said, it takes some practice. Is there any one little like tip that you can give? So anyone listening to this podcast, if they're like, okay, I hear the theory, I get the idea of it. What's something that I can actually start to do in my day-to-day walk that would help me with this? Is there any little tip that you can share with us before we wrap up?
Yes. And this is going to sound really strange. There are a couple of things. Well, one, take time to sit in the middle of a room in your space that you feel calm in and comfortable in, and either turn out all the lights or just close your eyes, and practice identifying what's in the room without actually using your eyes.
Mm,
Yeah, trying to do that. That will take practice. But once you start tuning, now I call this tuning in.
yeah.
So
Okay.
tune into the body, right? Tune in a specific way, using your gut to explore your immediate surroundings. So
Mm-hmm.
you want to feel without using your fingertips, but using your gut. And actually, this is a wonderful doctor, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, wrote a
Yes.
wonderful book about doing all of these things. And the body keeps the score, I think the
Yeah,
book
that's it.
title is. And so he talks about this, but I also learned it in school about felt sensing as a part, some of Carl Rogers' work. But anyway, feeling the room with your gut sense to
Mhm.
see what does it feel like. And so by practicing that, you can literally tune your body to hone in on those particular senses that you have basically divorced yourself from when you were little,
Yeah.
and causing you to tune in and to recognize what's going on in your space. And you practice
Wow.
that.
Powerful.
Uh, yeah, practice that. And what you so this is more specific. Tune into what? Tune into the positive energies that surround you in the room
Right.
and identify those. And that'll take time. So once you hone that skill, like any other skill, you'll become very good at it. And
Mhm.
then that will launch you into so many other areas of spirituality that it will probably surprise you.
I love that, Chris. Thank you for sharing that that wonderful exercise and tool that you all can go out and start using right now to begin creating more, more of a connection with self. I think allows us to identify connection with others, maybe be open to that possibility more, whether that be higher power, God, universe, or other people. We need
Hmm.
those connections in order to keep striving forward and keep healing, for sure.
Yeah.
Chris, it's been such a joy to talk with you today, and I know I've just like hit the tip of the iceberg of your wisdom and your knowledge on this. So I, look forward to having you back again. But for everybody who's listening, you can connect with Chris after listening to the podcast today by going to christimescoach.wordpress.com. You can also email him at christimesma@gmail.com, and I'll be sure to put those in the show notes so you can access them easily. And definitely reach out to Chris. He does lots of in-person workshops. He's going to be having some virtual workshop offerings down the road in the future, so you don't want to miss on that out on that. You can continue to connect with him and learn from this great guy. So
Mm.
Chris, thank you again so much for being my guest today.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Awesome. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in and joining us. Don't forget to visit rachelgrantcoaching.com to learn more about sexual abuse recovery coaching and check out the other resources that are there available on the site. And please be sure to subscribe to the podcast and leave us a note if you enjoy an episode. And come back next time because we have so much more to share. Until then, take good care of you.